The Umbar expansion launch experience in the Lord of the Rings Online has been a bit odd, to say the least. There have been a lot of negative reactions from the community on the expansion, but there have also been some positive reactions. So today we will be talking about some of these community reactions and my thoughts, as well as some new updates that we have. So there is a lot to get to in this sort of unusual video today, but the first thing I actually want to point out is we have an update on the roadmap for the Umbar expansion content to be released. So as we'll get to, one of the big issues I have found around the Corsairs of Umbar launch is all of the delayed content that has come without any announcement. We basically expected all this sort of stuff that's standard to be in an expansion release to well be in the release of the expansion, but was not there and no announcements of it not being there. So I think this is a pretty big contributor to a lot of the negative reactions that I have personally seen, is the lack of communication leading up to and including through the launch of the expansion. We have not gotten this until quite a few days after the Umbar launch, which was actually over a week ago, and we're finally getting a little bit of a roadmap of when we can expect, again, all this normal expansion content to finally be released. Right now, the expansion, I would describe it as more of a very large quest pack than an expansion. And personally, I don't even think it's necessarily bad that a lot of the content has been delayed, but we really lacked any sort of communication or heads up to temper our expectations for what Corsairs of Umbar launch was actually going to be. So basically, in the future, they are targeting December 6th, actually, in a few weeks to include, it's going to include some new quests that are going to be repeatable quests, and then the allegiances will be increased from tier 10 to tier 20, so you should be able to actually progress the allegiance and barter for stuff that you currently are unable to because you just can't progress that far. And then crafting guilds will become available. We finally have words on these, it's great to see. And then we will also have missions coming to Umbar. I think it is also really great to see that the Umbar missions will actually focus around Umbar, the city of Umbar, the Cape of Umbar, and the Shield Isles. So that's actually pretty exciting, and I actually think this is a great highlight of just one of my issues with the release of Umbar is how much non-Umbar content there was and the lack of missions, which is a great way that you can actually play Umbar related content, even on characters that aren't that level, or just as a little bit of a gap filler for questing and leveling. And also the crafting events are actually a pretty big part of the crafting overhaul, which is half missing as I've discussed in previous videos, but the Comb Forester event is also expected to finally return December 6th. I don't think this event alone will help some of the issues players are experiencing with their crafting tools not being able to be useful for all their crafting professions, given that the vocation system has been broken up and you now can select your individual professions. But from what I remember, last I heard is that the crafting events is where you will be able to get tools that can apply to any of the professions that you have and customize them to your character. Anyway, a little bit further beyond this, we will have the instances and raid, which we actually already knew were delayed, or at least going to be released after the launch of the expansion. We'll have those in 2024, and the allegiances will have further progression by that point. So I really do want to stress that it is great to have an update at this point, but I honestly feel like so much of the negative reaction to Umbar could have been delayed if they actually posted this ahead of the expansion launch. I don't really want this video to be focused on what could have been, but to get my point across, they could have actually mentioned all of this stuff maybe a week ahead of the expansion launch and said, hey, when the expansion launches, we'll just have basically quests. We're going to go ahead and release this because the quests are ready, the landscape is ready, and we are excited to release the expansion. But a lot of the endgame related content and progression related content beyond leveling will be released at a later time. If we had that type of messaging ahead of the expansion launch, I know at least for me and perhaps a lot of other players in the LOTRO community, there would have been a better reception to that initial launch phase of the expansion. So maybe that is something that can be used to improve future expansion launches and update releases for LOTRO. But another thing I want to highlight is update 38 has been very buggy in LOTRO. There's this long list of bugs. I believe that would read as Surbane. They have compiled a list of bugs, and it's actually even been updated today. I'm recording this November 17th, by the way. And I will say some of these have been addressed at this point, but I also do know that quite a few of these have not been addressed. So it's been a pretty buggy expansion launch, which just hasn't helped the overall experience. And I really don't know if there's a better use of the sweat smile emoji, that there has been 7 pages in this thread for bugs still being found. So I think there really is good stuff coming with Umbar, and way off in the future, I really think this still could be a top tier expansion for LOTRO, but it just needs a lot of work at this point. And why I'm on my video here is that is actually the first portion of community reactions we're going to be looking at. So this video was uploaded November 13th, actually a little bit after the expansion launch, and it was released early to channel members. That's why they got to comment here to start. So thank you, channel members. Also, thank you for everybody commenting. There have been a lot of thoughtful replies, and that's actually why I wanted to do this video. We've just had some recent developments since I had the idea for this video, but I really appreciate all the thoughtful replies. I just haven't really had a chance to respond to them, so I thought video format could be neat to that. So not only thanks for that, but also thanks for the easy content. Anyway, to get to the first comments, I actually haven't experienced much lag. This is on the Landreval server primarily, but of course that can vary greatly, and it does sound like some people are experiencing that. I also feel like I agree with the Zocker. I mean, that's basically what I have said, that I'm not really motivated to play the new expansion, not necessarily because it's not that fun. In fact, Gondor, the new Gondor content could have some of the best quests in the entirety of LOTRO, but I still can't be that motivated to run them because I am more excited for Umbar. But as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I have a plan, but that plan will be announced in a future video. I really feel like this comment from Malvar is a very concise summary of the thoughts I have been having around the expansion. Is that yes, there aren't any in-game activities yet. It's a bit bad now, but it will get better. That's true because they will release more in-game content in the future. But the best thing is the visuals. The world design and art team, I agree, did an incredible job. And now here's one of the comments that I think is a good highlight of me talking about Gondor potentially having some of the best quest content in all of LOTRO. For all I know, I haven't played through it, but a lot of people have been saying that they actually like the content in King's Gondor. But this is something that I have seen repeated over and over, is wait and see how it goes in the next few months. It's just an expansion that's not really fully ready to be called an expansion at this point, and we just need more time for it to really mature. And just like them, I'm also happy to be above ground and not in a dark place like Gundabad. And even Minas Morgul, the previous expansion, then Mordor before that, all of them have been dark. So it is really a breath of fresh air being in a relatively bright-skied Umbar. It doesn't feel as oppressive to just be in Umbar. This is actually a big problem with the Valars, that there's no crafting catch-up in the Valars. They have done a good job slowly over time, at least including more and more catch-ups in the Valar, as there should be for a character that's instantly boosted to 140. You should expect them to be reasonable for a level 140 character, but with the crafting revamp on top of getting no crafting progression in the Valar, it really is not the greatest experience, and sounds like it can be a letdown for some players. It would be for me. Stands in the Fire, who's actually a kin member, had a really long and thoughtful reply here. So their quick summary is that it's a mixed bag, but they can't fault anybody for putting it on hold now, as I kind of have been, but they've been enjoying it. It sounds like the questing and leveling experience has been pretty good. And going back to the top, they do a great job summarizing the communication from SSG around the expansion launch. So for a lot of expansions in LOTRO, and for most of this expansion cycle, as they're saying, there's been a lot of waiting until you have like less than a week or even the day that something is released to find out any information about it. There was the River Hobbits and the packs that came with them, so that gave like nobody time to plan for the River Hobbits, unfortunately. And this also reminds me of a phrase that I've kept meaning to talk about in a video, is what I feel like for the LOTRO team is that they essentially tried to overshoot their shot for the expansion, which made them come up way short, but the lack of communication made it feel like they pretended that they made their shot the entire time, and players quickly discovered that was not the case. Like, I really do think they attempted a lot with the Umbar expansion, but really just fell short when it came to actually releasing that. And then one of the things I've talked about with my lack of motivation to actually play through the Corsairs of Umbar expansion content is how much of it is in Gondor. The vast majority of the landscape, not necessarily landscape content, but the physical landscape space, is in Gondor and not in Umbar. So for Stands in the Fire here, even if they have enjoyed the content overall, they said it feels wrong for being so much of this particular expansion pack. And I actually think this is a great description, and that it feels like a content drop that was changed midstream and repackaged as the first half of Umbar, as if a lot of the Gondor content was supposed to be released ahead of the Umbar expansion launch. But they decided to change it to all be released within this Corsairs of Umbar expansion in Update 38. And I certainly know I would have been and probably would have already played through a lot more Umbar content if all the Gondor stuff was actually released before Umbar and they had a, say, different plan for how they were actually going to stagger the content releases. And oh yeah, the rework of the enhancement runes, definitely a great thing because you don't actually have a tier cap on, or an enhancement limit rather, on the enhancement rune. I think it's so much simpler and will be much better for level cap players, and I stress level cap players there because these changes were enacted for before the level cap, but I still just feel like having so many tiers spread throughout below the level cap, it still complicates things with enhancement runes. But hey, at least it still is as simple as just use enhancement runes as you get them, because you will outlevel them and then they will become basically vendor trash or use for alts. So that soup guy, their name makes me hungry, but they also have a good point that for somebody who just mains landscape content and doesn't have much time, they appreciate the early launch. And actually, to really hone it on their exact phrasing here, early launch. That's exactly what I feel like the Umbar expansion launch has been, an early launch of just the questing content and landscape, essentially. If SSG had essentially communicated basically that, then again, I think the overall reception of the expansion could have been a lot better. And hey, I did actually have a lot of fun with Gundabad on launch. I thought it was a really fun expansion to quest through, at least the first time, but it is good that people are having more fun than Gundabad. That's actually a pretty big sentiment I'm seeing from the questing and just landscape and being outside experience. Now, I have talked about in a prior video that I actually love having instances as leveling content. It's something that is done in other games, but it is true that potentially having those come later could mean a more bug-free experience, but that might be a bit optimistic with LOTRO, but hey, maybe they will prove us wrong. I'm also really curious, I don't remember if it's just this comment or even another one, but asking if I'm playing with lower graphic settings. Actually, in this video, I was playing with max graphic settings, and that includes some of the graphics updates. So perhaps it's the YouTube bitrate that just doesn't do it good, but usually people comment that my game, like my videos, look better than their game does, but I was on max settings here. And yeah, if you left a comment that pretty much echoes some of these other comments that I've already talked about, I'm not intentionally ignoring them, but I basically don't want to keep saying the same thing over and over, but I really think this one's worth highlighting just how many thumbs ups it has, that we don't actually have that many new areas because we just have the Shield Isles of Umbar and the Cape of Umbar for actually new areas. Well, actually Outer Gondor with Penathgelen and the Amphilis area are also new, but they're still Gondor. And this is exactly why I haven't been too excited to start the questing experiences, because the Umbar expansion needs more Umbar. I also do think it is good to point out that no expansion launch is going to be perfect, but I think there really needed to be, again, communication around the launch of the expansion, with crafting not being done yet, especially with this comment. And if you are a commenter like this person, then you are quite valuable to the Louis VII community. Thank you for your comments. Also really is true, at least for me, often in LOTRO, it's the landscape, music, and quest lines that are 10 out of 10, and then the rest is going to be a lot lower rated for them. It is 3 out of 10. I also do find it interesting in that one of the Court of the Rings, who's the community manager, one of their streams, Severlin, who's the executive producer, said they would delay it if they weren't happy. Well, they delayed it to November 8th from November 1st, but it is kind of interesting to think about if they actually were happy with the release. Maybe they were, but again, expectations versus reality for us players. So I actually think this is an interesting comment that I was about to skip over. I'm glad I think I deserve more than just a few thousand views. That's maybe a little bit questionable, but looking into a new game, I've actually been playing Return to Moria a lot, but I still enjoy LOTRO. Almost because of this comment, I just made another video about what LOTRO does good, because I actually do enjoy LOTRO, but it'd basically be a repeat of that, why I play LOTRO videos. So check that out if you haven't, for some reasons why I do actually enjoy LOTRO and why I care about all this stuff in the first place. And yeah, basically good confirmation from somebody who has gotten level 150 that there is basically no endgame content and you are quite limited with the systems that they do have, such as allegiances. I really appreciate this comment from Bob Ross the God, but they might be spoiling too much of my next video. And see, this is why I actually love reading these comments, because there are some good points that I maybe don't stress enough actually in videos. So as Neon Seas here says, there are some rough things, but you do have to appreciate their their effort to actually create such a beautiful and visually unique new area that is very different from what we have had in LOTRO. So from that standpoint, I really do think it is great so far. And as I talked about, that's the reason I was actually walking through Umbar in this video, was to appreciate some of the visuals and just differences in the landscape with this. And yes, I have actually gotten into some details on this very unfortunate news, but hey, it does mean you all will have an overly dramatic video on it soon. It is good to see from a couple comments, including this one, that some people don't actually mind that you start in Gondor, and if like half or whatever portion of the expansion content is actually in there. And I think that's really something I just have to take time and reorient myself towards when I do actually play through the expansion. And I also think it's interesting to see what people are thinking about the expansion beyond just my commenters. So thank you, the LOTRO subreddit, for some extra content for this video. But one comment I did want to highlight is this comment, which I think this particular sentence here is really highlighting, even with the new areas in Gondor, kind of the issue is that it's still Gondor. You have Outer Gondor, yes, but it's still Gondor and the Corsairs of Umbar expansion. So they went through just the epic quests actually in King's Gondor and then sailed to the Shield Isles and have started to enjoy the expansion content. It sounds like they're doing the side quests there now. And I actually think this is even a good example, is that they feel like they bought the Gundabad expansion but would have to play through the War of Three Peaks to actually be able to enter Gundabad. And there was actually that issue with the book quest that eventually they resolved by changing it. Not something they have done for Corsairs of Umbar, because you do have to play through the first book of the new book quests. But yeah, after that update, at least you could just enter with the Legacy of Durin chapter 5, I believe it was, and go straight to the Gundabad expansion content without having to play War of Three Peaks before it. And I think it's interesting, if you are a player who is just going through the new quests in Gondor, you might find it a bit boring because it still is Gondor. Gundabad, like right off from the rip, had some new areas within Gundabad, but these are again the same areas that you've gone through 30 to 40 levels before that look largely the same on the surface. Again, Central Gondor, Eastern Gondor portion's a little bit different because you don't have the Shadow of Mordor and all the such, but it is still Gondor after all. But hey, again, some people really are enjoying the expansion content. And now we go to our favorite place, the LOTRO forums. Here we're going to look at Delvings some more. So the Delvings have basically not really been updated for level 150, even though they're only available to be run at level 150 because they're a level cap system for level cap players. So I do have to admit that Delvings are a bit divisive in the community. Some people like them, some people don't, but either way, they are a system that we have in game that has really felt like it's been neglected in Umbar. But it sounds like that has actually been intentional due to their design of the system. So this is a system that you can only play at level 150, yet the gear has not been advanced to level 150. It's still level 140. So I could make a whole video on this and why I think this is a bit crazy, but essentially with the Delvings, their intention is that they won't actually update it until tier 3 of the raid is released, so it's an alternate way to get comparable items. So at this point, they have not updated Delving rewards for level 150 because the raid has not been released. Now, I think the key problem here that I have really stressed is that this is a level 150 only system, yet you're getting level 140 rewards. So not only is it essentially a waste of time to run them from that perspective, but you're also actually wasting the opportunity or time really to get new stuff that you are instead getting old level 140 stuff that is of no use to you now at the 150 cap. So it doesn't actually seem like this is an issue of neglect of the system, but what I personally think is just not good design, or not design with much forethought for what would happen with future expansion launches and level cap increases really. So the question that I was starting to form in my mind, but we had Ida Opera here on the forums actually asked the same question. If the Delving rewards have not been updated to level 150, then why are they available to run at level 150? If the rewards are not in place, it would be better to just disable them until you actually have relevant rewards for the Delving system. And boy, it seems like y'all could just read the LOTRO forums instead of watch my videos, because I was also having the same thoughts here, is that Delving rewards don't even have to be comparable to tier 3 raid rewards. You can have bad, so to speak, Delving rewards that just aren't as good at that are comparable to, say, quests. You could have them comparable to instances, and you could just have an array of rewards that's not just, hey, tier 3 raid rewards, that's all we really care about with Delvings. So as Oxymines here says, that They think the Delving reward table should include yellow armor drops and barter at the launch of a new level band, and then purple they could add with instances, for example, and then teal with the raid. I think that is actually a very reasonable and idea that I feel like should have been implemented from the start of the system even. On top of that, I think an interesting idea is that Delvings are not even group content inherently. They do actually have the group form of those, but originally with missions at least, they were solo/duo content. The rewards basically balance around duo because you can run them duo, at least that's my suspicion this entire time. But they're almost an entirely separate progression from the new expansion instances, or whatever that level cap era is. Instances, rewards, and raid rewards, they're completely separate progression from that. So I don't necessarily think they should be tied to the release of raids. But I'm also of the idea that Delving shouldn't necessarily have anything exclusive that you can't necessarily earn through other means. I feel like they're a perfect system for being an alternative to some other means to acquire certain things, like gear and different maybe resources for your legendary items and the such, but also being a system that you actually do have some motivation to run them. So hopefully, even though there is a disconnect between what the developers had for their design intentions with the system and what the community thought, hopefully from that disconnect, they will actually take this feedback and perhaps implement some changes to the Delving system and even alter their design philosophy to better match what the community would want out of it. I will also highlight real quick, I almost forgot about it, is that Delvings are actually a great way to make old instances relevant. We don't have any new instance, new dungeons, new raids with the Umbar expansion, but you could have all this old relevant instances if the Delvings were actually worth running at all. I mean, they've done this with Great Barrow, they've done it with Numenos for the group instances, they could do it with future instances, and there really is just a lot of potential there. There's also the featured instance system, which I actually haven't heard too much about for 150, so let me know what type of rewards you're getting for the featured instances if you are running them. But there is actually a lot of stuff like this that they have to fill in the gaps of not having much new like instance group dungeon type content that they just kind of leave by the wayside, when it could be potential content for us to run and repeat as endgame content, which, as we have highlighted throughout this video, there is a major lack of on the launch of this expansion. And with that, that is where I will leave this video, but hopefully you'll enjoy the different format, perhaps a little bit slower pace, just seeing what the community thinks with Umbar. It also gave me the opportunity to maybe respond to some of these comments, even if indirectly in video format, when I just haven't had the time to actually type replies, especially to some of the more thoughtful comments that I really do appreciate. In the future for Umbar, I will be having a video on my plans for the expansion, and I will also have a video on the crafting in it. And that one is not going to be very positive, at least to start. As for this video, I would definitely appreciate if you comment your thoughts, but I'm really curious what people are thinking about the future of Umbar. Do you think in a few months' time that it could be a top tier LOTRO expansion, or are you perhaps not as hopeful as I might seem here? Let me know what you think, and if you enjoyed this different LOTRO video, then consider liking and subscribing for more, and thanks for watching, everyone.